The water is warm, the mirror is fogged, and a man is standing under the shower doing nothing in particular. He tilts his head down, the way anyone does when the day finally slows, and his eyes drift to his own chest. Two small marks look back at him. He has seen them every single day of his life, and never once stopped to think about them. Then, for no reason at all, a strange little question slips into his mind and refuses to leave. Why are these here? He will never nurse a child. His body was never built to. And yet there they sit, precise and symmetrical, in the exact place they would sit on someone who could. He turns off the water. The question does not switch off with it. It follows him out of the bathroom, and if you have ever asked it yourself, it is about to follow you through one of the strangest stories your own body has to tell. It feels like a glitch, a leftover joke of biology, a part that got copied by mistake and never cleaned up. That is the story most of us quietly believe, if we ever think about it at all. Men have them because women have them, and nobody bothered to finish the edit. But that answer is not just incomplete, it is pointed in the wrong direction. The truth is stranger and far more beautiful, and it has almost nothing to do with feeding babies. It is about a blueprint, a shared set of instructions written into you long before your body was ever male or female. And here is the part that should make you look down at your own chest a little differently. That blueprint is not ancient history sealed away in a museum. It is still running inside you right now. To understand why, we have to rewind. Not to some hairy ancestor crouched on a plane, at least not yet. We have to rewind to a place every one of us has been, and none of us remember. The first few weeks inside the womb. Because the real answer to this question was written there, in the dark. Before you had a name, before you had a sex, before you were anything more than a plan quietly unfolding. Two questions will pull us through this story, and they are worth holding in your mind as we go. Where did these marks actually come from, all those hundreds of millions of years ago? And why, after all this time, with all of evolution's ruthless editing, has nature never once bothered to erase them? Start at the beginning, the true beginning, when you were only a few weeks old and smaller than a grain of rice. At that moment, there was no such thing as a male body or a female body. There was one body. A single shared design that every human embryo follows, regardless of what it will later become. Picture it as a rough draft that has not yet decided its own ending. The heart is being laid down, already twitching into its first rhythm. The spine is curling into shape. Tiny buds that will become arms push outward from the sides. And along the front of that unfinished torso, two faint lines appear, running down from what will become the armpits toward the belly. Anatomists call them the milk lines. On these ridges, in a handful of specific spots, the very first hints of nipples begin to form. Notice the timing, because the timing is the entire secret. This is happening early. It is happening before the switch has been thrown. At this stage, every embryo, the one that will grow into a woman and the one that will grow into a man, is building the exact same thing in the exact same place, following the exact same instructions. The nipples are drawn onto the blueprint first. The decision about which kind of body will eventually carry them comes later, weeks later, as a separate step. And this is what quietly overturns everything the joke assumes. The marks are not added to a male body as an afterthought. They are already there, sketched in, before the body is male at all. That single fact dismantles the whole idea of a mistake. Nothing was copied by accident. The instructions did not slip. Both bodies begin identical because, for those first weeks, there is only one set of plans and everyone is reading from it. So the marks on that man in the shower were not a smudge left over from someone else's design, borrowed and never returned. They were drawn onto his own original draft, in the very first chapter of his construction, at a moment when his body had not yet chosen a path. They are as much his as his own heartbeat. But this raises a deeper question, and it drags us much further back than the womb. Why does that shared blueprint include nipples in the first place? Where did the instructions themselves come from? To answer that, we have to leave the human body entirely and travel back across an almost unimaginable stretch of time. Roll the clock back more than 200 million years, long before there were people, long before there were apes, long before a single flower had ever bloomed, to a world ruled by strange, low-slung creatures that were not quite reptiles and not yet mammals. These were our distant ancestors, and they were quietly trying out something brand new on planet Earth. They were beginning to feed their young with their own bodies. It did not start with anything as neat as a nipple. The earliest version was almost certainly a kind of nourishing sweat, a rich fluid seeping from glands in the skin, pooling on the surface so hatchlings could lap it up. Picture a small, scaly parent hunched low over a clutch of leathery eggs in the warm dark, its skin weeping a pale, life-giving liquid, the newborns pressing close to drink it straight from the surface of its body. There is no mouth-to-mouth, no dramatic scene, just a slow miracle happening quietly in the dirt. That was the invention that would one day define an entire branch of life on this planet. It was messy, it was humble, and it changed everything that came after. Over countless generations, those simple skin glands grew more organized. The scattered seep gathered into channels. The channels gathered into openings. And eventually, in the mammals that followed, those openings tightened and focused into the neat structure we now call a nipple. A single controlled tap in place of a leaking patch of skin. Here is the crucial part, the part that answers our second question. This equipment was never coded as belonging to one sex. It was built into the fundamental body plan of mammals themselves, the shared toolkit handed down to every descendant without exception. To be a mammal, at the very deepest level, is to carry the machinery for milk. And that machinery gets installed in the earliest draft of the body, before any question of sex is even raised. So now the picture sharpens. The reason men carry these marks is not that they were borrowed from women at all. It is that both men and women inherited them from a far older source, a blueprint that predates the very split between the sexes by hundreds of millions of years. You are not carrying someone else's feature on loan. You are carrying your own inheritance, passed down in an unbroken line straight from the first creatures that ever fed their young from their skin. This is the shared draft, still visible on every chest alive today. It is, quite literally, a part of you that is older than sex itself, older than the difference between man and woman, older than almost anything you think of as defining you. Which brings us to the switch. If every embryo starts identical, how does one body become male and another female? And why does the male body keep the nipples it drew so early? Return to that tiny embryo, a few weeks along, nipples already sketched onto its chest. For a while longer, nothing about its sex is settled. The plan is still shared, still neutral, still waiting. Then, on a schedule of its own, a signal arrives. In some embryos, a particular instruction carried on the Y chromosome flips on, and the body begins to pour out testosterone. That hormone sweeps through the developing form like a second wave of orders, and it starts rewriting parts of the plan, steering the embryo down the path toward a male body. But look closely at when this happens, because the order of events is the whole answer. The signal arrives after the nipples are already built. The construction crew drew them in the opening days of the project, when there was only one blueprint on the table. The hormones do not show up until later, and they carry instructions to change what comes next, not to march back and tear out what has already been finished. Evolution, it turns out, is a builder that almost never returns to demolish something already standing, as long as that something is not actively causing harm. And 2 small marks on a chest cause no harm at all. They do not slow you down. They do not cost energy worth mentioning. They do not make you easier prey. So they stay. Not out of purpose, but because there was never any reason and never any simple mechanism to remove them. And once again, quietly, this is you. This exact sequence played out in your own first weeks, in the dark, before you were you. Still, a nagging doubt should be forming, and it deserves a real answer rather than a shrug. Evolution is famously ruthless about waste. It has hollowed the eyes out of fish that drifted into lightless caves because eyes are expensive and useless in the dark. It has erased the legs of the ancestors of snakes when a body that slithered proved better than one that walked. When a part stops earning its keep, time usually finds a way to trim it. So why not this? Why has selection let a supposedly useless feature ride along, untouched and unhidden, across so many millions of years and so many billions of bodies? This is the real mystery at the heart of the story. And to crack it, we have to stop thinking like a spectator and start thinking like a detective. Here is the puzzle laid out plainly on the table. A feature that does no obvious work should, over enough time, fade away. That is the pattern we see again and again across the tree of life. Yet male nipples have not faded. They appear, sharp and precise and correctly placed, on essentially every male mammal you can name, generation after generation, with no sign at all of vanishing. Something is protecting them. The question is what? Let us bring in the suspects one at a time. The first possibility is that they are secretly useful in the male body after all. But this suspect does not survive questioning. In the ordinary run of things, they perform no essential task in men, so plain usefulness is not what is shielding them. The second suspect is more subtle and far harder to rule out. Perhaps they survive simply because they are cheap. This is easy to overlook, but removing a structure is not free. It would demand its own long series of mutations, its own careful edits to the developmental plan, all spent on erasing something that costs the body almost nothing to keep in the first place. Natural selection only bothers to delete what is worth the trouble of deleting. When a feature is this inexpensive to carry, there is simply no pressure pushing against it, no advantage waiting for the body that finally sheds it. So it drifts along, untouched, because nothing is pulling it apart. That is a real part of the answer. But there is a third suspect, and this is the one that truly closes the case. The deepest reason male nipples endure is that they are not really a separate feature that could be removed on its own. They are woven into a single shared program that builds both kinds of bodies from the same starting instructions. The genes that lay down nipples early in development are the very same genes, running in the very same window of time, for every embryo alive, male and female alike. In female bodies, that early groundwork is later completed, hormone by hormone, into a fully working system for feeding young. But the groundwork itself, the initial drawing of the structure onto the chest, is common to all of us. To strip nipples out of male embryos specifically, evolution would have to invent an entirely new, sex-specific detour, a special set of instructions that deletes the feature in one type of body while leaving it perfectly intact in the other, and does all of that without disturbing anything else in the shared early plan those instructions are tangled up with. That is a staggeringly complicated and risky edit to attempt, all to remove something completely harmless. One wrong step and you damage the very system the other half of the species depends on to survive. It is far easier, far safer, and far more likely simply to leave the shared draft alone and let both bodies carry it forward untouched. The male nipple survives because it is a free passenger on a blueprint that has to exist anyway. Deleting it would cost far more than keeping it ever could. And there is a quiet piece of evidence that confirms the machinery is not dead junk, only resting. Under unusual hormonal conditions, some male bodies can actually begin to produce milk. It is rare, and it usually points to an underlying imbalance rather than anything to aim for, but it reveals something genuinely remarkable about what is hiding in plain sight. The equipment was never absent. It was there the whole time, fully installed, simply switched to standby, waiting behind a door that hormones normally keep shut. The nipples on a man are not an empty decoration painted onto the skin. They are a dormant version of the same working system, sketched from the same ancient plans, connected to the same deep machinery. That is the button on our mystery. They persist not because they do a job, but because they are part of a shared design too deeply woven to remove and too cheap to be worth the trouble of trying. Now step back and feel how far we have actually traveled. We began with a man staring down at his own chest, half convinced he was looking at a flaw in his design. We ended up peering across more than 200 million years, watching a nameless, scaly ancestor weep the first drops of milk from its skin in the warm dark. Watching a single stubborn blueprint pass down through countless generations of creatures that lived and died and fed their young. Watching that same blueprint quietly draw 2 small marks onto every human embryo before it has chosen a sex at all. Those marks are not a joke, and they were never a mistake. They are a signature. Proof that deep in your earliest development, long before you were a boy or a girl, you followed the same ancient plan as every human who has ever lived, and every mammal that came before them. And this is the part worth holding on to as the water drains away. That process is not finished, not locked in the past, not gone. It runs again, in full, every single time a new human body takes shape anywhere on Earth. The same early draft, the same shared instructions, the same 2 faint lines traced down a tiny, unfinished chest before the switch is ever thrown. When the man in the shower looked down, he was not seeing a leftover borrowed from someone else. He was seeing the oldest chapter of his own story, still printed on his skin, still legible if you know how to read it. A blueprint older than sex, older than humanity, older than almost anything you could name, carried quietly on the front of every single person you will ever meet. So the next time you catch yourself thinking that some part of your body makes no sense, remember those 2 small marks and what they really are. Not a mistake, not a spare part, not a joke half finished. A message from deep time, written into you before you were you, and still being written into every new life today. If that idea pulls at your curiosity, stay with me a while. There are other secrets folded quietly into the human body, other pieces of you that are far older and far stranger than they look, and every one of them has a story just like this one, waiting in the dark to be told.